So I could talk about Claude Code, Cursor, agentic workflows, and a bunch of other things that have been happening over the past 2 months, over and over and over and over and over again. But one of the things that I know will never die because of what's called the Lindy effect, which I'll go into if needs be, is that the fundamentals do not die. Like the great C.T. Fletcher says, you must have strong basics. And one of the strong basics pertain to how the business is meant to run in the first place. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you an example of an automation or a set of automations that are powering a content agency's workflows and is delivering the biggest bang for their buck alongside some of the other things that we've been able to build. And that is what's called an internal review process. So if you are a content agency or you're in the content agency world, a lot of the times you'll be using a number of different tools. And the two tools that are used the most are one, Google Drive, because sharing Google Drive links for clients so that they can put their raw items in there is the easiest way for you to just communicate back and forth between the client. The second one is Frame. Frame.io is a tool that shows, or it's basically just a management tool for content. And it's really, really good internally for different teams, but it's also really, really good because the API is incredibly flipping powerful. So I've got clients open Your Social Currency, good friends of mine, and what we've been able to do for them is what I'm going to show you today. And this is about the internal review process. So when you import an item that has, let's say this was an infographic that needed to be created. This is actually, I think I robbed this off Nick Abraham's LinkedIn. So if you're listening, what's up, bro? But this is, for example, what would be a thumbnail or an infographic if you were doing some sort of Instagram content or YouTube content for a client. So this is an example of a piece of content for a client. I'm going to now move this to reviewed, and I'm going to then show you a couple of the automations as they work. Now you may be wondering, oh, you're still on Make. Oh, you're so 2024. Listen, keep a client for longer than 12 months and then come back to me. That's the first thing. And the second thing, Make has the best error handling in the game, bar none. NAN actually doesn't touch Make in this specific circumstance. And because of that, I'm still here. So that's the second thing. But either way, you need something in order to be able to put all of the critical infrastructure and the general, pipage and drainage, etc. The plumbing needs to be correct for your clients, and either of them will do. Make is the one that I'm showing, but the principles will remain the same if you're using NAN because all of this is APIs and HTTP requests anyways. But I'm going to explain what's just happened. So we have, and if I zoom in, or I'll just go into it and show you what's happened, you can see here that the first thing that happens is we grab the file, we get the metadata for the file, and then we do some things in Airtable. We set a couple of variables, we set some assignees, and then we move things over depending on the type of item it is. And then we send some Slack messages, and then we iterate over some comments. So that's the entire flow. I'm going to show you what some of those outputs actually looked like. So this is what's happened inside of the Airtable. And you can see here that the item inside of the specific Kanban has moved over to amendments needed. Now, I'm not going to show you the message in Slack because I don't want to dox my clients as clients, but the Slack message says something along the lines of this. This is the name of the asset. This is the editor's ID. Check frame here, see the comments in the thread. Very, very simple, very, very easy. And the whole point of this is what ends up happening here is that one of the social media managers has gone through and has double checked the content and has put their own either comments on it or has just said that this is crap and you need to do it again. Maybe there's been a message thread somewhere inside of Slack as well to manage this process as well. But for the most part, the big thing that's happened is this needs to go back and some changes need to get made. That notification is required for the editor because a lot of the times, a lot of people who have different editors from different countries, etc., won't be on the same time zone. So being able to keep this flow in this same way makes things work asynchronous. And if there are deadlines and due dates in place, oftentimes you don't miss stuff, especially when you have all of the things that I'm showing you together. So that's what happens whenever there is an item that has been rejected. Now, this has also moved into a different folder, which is called the rejected re-edit folder. So the way that we work when we work with clients is that we'll set up 5 to 6 different folders based on how the editing pipeline usually works. Because the way things will start is it's usually going to be something is ready to edit, or there is some footage that needs to be clipped. Let's say my client would have gone on a photo shoot with their client. They would have collected some raw data together or raw footage together, and then the videographer would have clipped it up, done some color coding. I don't know what the term is, but color grading, and then made it so that the clips are actually really nice and really easy to look at, and then spliced them up, put them inside a frame, and then left them alone inside of that clipped footage folder. Once those items are in that folder, a social media manager will come in and they'll say, hey, out of these 80 clips that you have, we're going to take these 30 for the month. So they mark them and then they move them over to ready to edit. At that point, an editor gets assigned. That editor then goes in, and then given the SOPs, the guidelines, and the brand guidelines essentially for said client, they will go in and they'll make the edits that they need to make. Once they've made the edits that they need to make, they'll then move it into a review folder, and then that review folder will go to the social media manager as a notification. They will then go in, they'll say yes or no, and then once it's been approved, it moves to an approved folder. If it's been rejected, it moves to a rejected folder, which is what rejected re-edit means. So that's the process behind that. But the whole point of this is that things need to move without actually having to drag things around, and that's exactly what we've been able to do with this process. So if I go back in here and I say that this one was rejected and now needs a re-edit, so at that point, an editor would have come in and they would have made their second edit. And then when they've made their second edit, let's say they've dropped it in here. And the way that the flow is meant to work is that once this edit has been dropped in, what they'll do is they'll stack one on top of the other. So this here is now version 3. And then they'll go in, and I can make a separate video about this, but this process is called versioning. And once the editor has finished the edit, they paste the URL in here and then click this to send the item to review. This is now going to move it into this stage here to review. It's going to launch off a Slack message for the social media managers to take a look at. And then what's going to happen after that is if we go back into needs review, you'll see that the item, which is in version 3, is right over here. At this point, we then can say, let's say, okay, this one was actually good to go. We'll then click approved, and what this will do is this will change. It will change in here in the Kanban, and what that's going to do is it's going to basically say, all right, this one was all good. We now need to essentially move it over into the need scheduling bucket, and this internal review process will trigger once again. And you know what? There was a warning. We don't hide anything on this channel. This errored out for a reason that was related to the social media management calendar that we're making. However, I literally ran it by itself and it just resolved without me doing anything. So I don't know what happened there. But the good thing is it's landed in need scheduling, and then the actual item itself has ended up in approved, ready to post. So what is this process? What's actually going on here? What I want to do is I'm going to go through each of the individual nodes and then explain my reasoning as to how we ended up there. And to do that, I'm actually going to go back to a previous version of what this automation looked like, which I have with another client that I'll pull up in a second. So this is the previous version of the internal review process. You're not going to see much of a change, especially from this bird's eye view. But what you will see is this green arrow on all of these frame icons. Now, this green arrow is basically saying there is a new version of the frame app available. Consider replacing this module with a newer version. Now, if I click this, I break everything because Frame decided to migrate its API from version 2 to version 4. And because of that, everything that we had deprecated without much of a warning. So all of my other content agency clients who basically had a surprise move from frame.io to next.frame.io basically had all of their automations broken. It's very, very unfortunate, but it is what it is. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this is because the process is basically exactly the same. There's about 5 or 6 steps no matter what happens. The very first thing is we watch. The trigger is a change in this button here. And initially that change was something that we could directly access, but it ended up not becoming the case. And then what we do after that is we run a GET request. Now, if you've seen anything on my channel, you will know that I swear by something that I call payload augmentation. Payload augmentation can be easily defined as trigger, read, automate. we have a trigger, which means that something has happened in an app. The trigger can be a schedule. The trigger can be a button being clicked. It could be something else being pushed. It could be some other item happening. It could be a certain event happening. Say, for example, it's a cold email campaign creation software like a Smart Lead or a Plus Vibe or an Instantly, and a reply has been received. That is an event that we can subscribe to a webhook, and that webhook can send information off. After that, based on the information that we get from the request itself, we run a GET request. A GET request brings us more information that we can use in future steps. And that can in turn be used to make more and more GET requests until we have this gigantic pool of data that we can manipulate, we can run formulas on, we can run filters on, we can combine and set and create different variables out of to do whatever it is that we need to do in the process of making any of these automations. So if I show you how things start, it's always going to be a trigger and then a series of GET requests and then a series of automation steps like update this or create that or send this message or pull this information from some other place. So we grab the asset, we grab the information from here so that we basically enrich this information with this node. Then we enrich the entire pool of data or the entire pool of information by running a search records inside of our Airtable for the item inside of our Kanban. And then we get the client, so we now have client information, and now we start to do our automation steps. Now we start to move things around. We start to move the items to approved folders. We can then go by if it's a video or if it's a thumbnail information we don't have unless we run this step here to grab that data. We run an if statement here, which determines if the item needs to be moved in a specific status. So it will move into external review, i.e. client review. If it's a long form piece of content, it will move into ready to post if it's a short form piece of content. Then we send Slack messages, then we create review links, then we do a bunch of other stuff inside of Airtable and inside the frame, and that's all good to go. That is basically the entire process. If I go to what the actual new version of that is, it's pretty much the exact same thing. It's a trigger, it's a read, and then it's an automation. So in this case, the very first thing that we do, and the reason why we had to do this is because changing this right here doesn't have its own step. So we had to basically create a webhook, stick it inside a frame, and say whenever this status changes, just give us some data back. And then we can use that data to backtrace and understand exactly what's happened there. From there, we then get some metadata, and then this is what the API call looks like. So now I'm just going to go into all of these steps and then just show you how things look. So here, this is the information that you get whenever a webhook has been received, and you get a bunch of information, including like what the actual item was. So the status itself is actually called a piece of metadata. Metadata is, there's so much metadata inside a frame. Going in and talking about what it is just going to be a waste of time. But we grab all of that information and then we run the resources ID through this HTTP request. And then what that does is it gives us all the information about said item as far as all of the metadata. And then from there, we basically run it through one or two of these items. Now, if the item was marked as approved, we send, this is basically calling a sub scenario, the same way that you would inside of NAN. This is what it looks like inside of make.com. We send the resource ID and we send the status. And then if it's in progress, because again, we have, if it's approved, it will go up there. If it's, not approved, it will go elsewhere. So like if it's approved or not approved, it'll go here. If it's in progress, it'll go here. If this errored out for whatever reason, this is a diagnostic step for the most part, because we do this inside of these automations as well. We just send a not found or other errors, depending on what the actual information is. And I can go into error handling in another video. I'm not going to do that today. So this will take it to the internal review scenario. This is what this is. So the moment that this triggers, here's what happens. We actually take the information from the scenario inputs, which is the resource ID and the status, and then we feed it into this first step here. So we grab the file again. When we grab the file, and if I go back in, I'll show you all of the items within this. If we grab the file, this is what we get. We get the ID of the file, we get the file name, we get the upload status, we get the type of file it is, we get the media type, the project ID, the parent ID, and a view URL. Now, a lot of people will scan over some of this stuff and think that it's not useful. And I promise you, you are missing a trick. you're absolutely missing a trick, because there's certain things that are hidden inside of these responses that can influence the things that you didn't know you could do. So I'm going to come back to some of the things about type and file sizes, either in this video or in later videos, because there's a lot of things that we've built for a lot of the content agencies and people who just deal with Frame IO. There's a lot of stuff that we built for them, and there's a lot of things that we can actually talk about there. But don't sleep on this information. That's all I'm going to say. So we grab the file, we then get the metadata. And what that looks like is this API request where we just grab the file ID metadata, and then we get this information here, which is basically the same step as this. It's literally the exact same step, because again, this was for diagnostics. This one is not for diagnostics. We actually need this information. And then we grab the content, we run a search, and what the search looks like is the following. So if I open up the internal review process and go to get content, you'll see that we go into their base, we go into their table, and we basically run this. Now, this is an auto number, and an auto number is it's something that you see inside of Postgres and like Airtable and a bunch of other things. You can basically create an ID field or an ID column that isn't the record ID and just have that be something that will show all the time, which is why you'll see in a lot of the things that I build, there are these numbers. Now, there isn't one here, but you'll see, yeah, this one here has got a number. This one, 1138. It's because it is item number 1138, which means it's the row number 1138 inside of this, inside of the Airtable. So that's the reason why it exists the way that it does. And then all we do here is we run this search, which looks for that specific number. And all we're doing right now is a map. And map can be read basically as, inside of this block of data here, give me this, where this value equals this. So the metadata ID for the auto number, which is this field over here, has, let me go back. It has this ID. This is the definition ID. We want the value. We want, was it approved? Does it need review? And that's essentially what this means. So if we can grab the auto number for this, we can basically map this to our Airtable and make whatever changes we want to make. So that's kind of an explanation of what we're doing there. From there, with this router, it either takes us to found or not found. If for whatever reason that card doesn't exist, we send a message, and that message is, this is the description, this is the ID of the item in frame, this is the link to the asset. Internal review failed because the video doesn't have a card linked inside of Airtable. Either the card doesn't exist or the description is blank. Please try again. So that's just another piece of error handling that we've done. But if it's found, it goes here. Now we are determining if the asset type is a video, a file, or a version stack. And the way that files are treated inside a frame is that there's three types. It's either a file, which would be a document, a PDF, a JPEG, a PNG, an image file, any of those kinds of files, CSVs for whatever reason, if you can use spreadsheets and stuff inside of Frame, which you're not going to, but they're all treated as files. Everything else, MP4s and all of the other types, are all video files. The moment, and I did this at the start of the video, the moment where you place one thing on top of another, you have a version stack. Those two things are treated differently. So a version stack is just a set of items that have all been stacked on top of each other, and they are a combination of files. So it's basically video, file, combination of videos and files. Those are the three things. And the way that the API speaks now, we basically need to be able to speak on or determine what's what, because that's the reason why we have these branches. This branch will fail if this branch will fail if it's a file. This branch will fail if it's a version stack. You can see here that this one here is, /files. This one here is / it's actually not even / files. This is just the metadata one here. So in fact, it's this one here, version stacks. So you can tell they're just two different endpoints. So that's what we're doing. So once we have grabbed once we've grabbed the type of file that it is, we want to save that information. We want to grab the client, which is just to get client records. Then we want to set the assignee. So we can now just so this is the editor, this is the graphic designer. We can just grab that information and use it in a little bit more of an easier way. Then we grab the specific assignee. And the reason why we've done what we've done there is because we needed to do this filter here. So if the editor is blank, it's a graphic designer. And if it's not blank, it's an editor. just because we're managing all content from one Kanban, which means if you're doing infographics, carousels, static images, static ads, and you're doing videos, video ads, UGC video, AI video, X, Y, and Z, and two different roles are playing around with the two, that's the reason why we needed something like this in order to get the right assignee. So that's the reason why that looks the way that it looks. Then we now use the information that we grabbed from this very first stage here, where we dragged everything that was either approved or needs review. We then run it through either approved or needs review. That's kind of how this is all working. Then you have what the actual items are. When something needs review, it's moved to the rejected folder. Then its status, i.e. approved, needs review, blah, 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 is set to null so that it can be changed again at a later stage. Then we move it in the Kanban over to amendments needed. And then after moving it over, we send a Slack message and then we grab the comments. When it's approved, we do the same thing. We set the status to null. If for whatever reason, moving to approved didn't work, this will actually fail if it's a file when you're calling the version stack request. But this will work if you're calling a file on a file request. So it's basically going to go in the right direction depending on what it is. And this is the reason why I still use make, because you can't do this really in NAN without having to do this across multiple different workflows. You're just going to eat your workflows up that way anyways. So this here is what happens whenever you have version stacks. This is what happens whenever you have files. But the whole point of this is we move the item over to the approved folder. We set the status to null. We move it over to schedule, and then we alert the team. Now, this here is what it looks like. You have the accounts ID, you have the project's ID. You can hard copy and paste this from the URL whenever you are inside of the specific, just right here, because you can even see it. Project, this is the project ID, and then this is just a view. But inside of this, if you're in the right folder, like if I just went back one folder, you can see here, project, this is the project ID, everything over here, and then this is the folder ID. So that's kind of where we're getting all of these hard-coded values from. So this is what the account's ID is, and this is what the project's ID is. And then we're just getting the metadata values, we're patching it, and then we're patching the resource ID's status. Because if you remember, in this step here, when we're grabbing some of the metadata, also not this step, where we were doing the map function, which was somewhere around here, you saw what the items were, how they looked, and what they were meant to say. So that's just what we ended up doing there. From there, we then moved everything over to schedule. And this is just us updating this. This is the field that actually broke when I was showing you initially at the start of this video. It broke for a reason that I still can't even see here, but the whole point is it still works anyways, and it still does work for the team. And we do the same thing if it's a file. Then for the rejected, it's basically the exact same API calls, except this last one here, we get comments. And getting comments is as simple as we grab, for this file's ID, we grab all of the comments. And this is going through and it comes out as a massive array. So if there's 15 comments on this one piece of, on this one asset inside a frame, all 15 will just be in an array. And if you try to send it off in one go, it's just going to give you the first item. So we split them up. And then what we do is, because we have a Slack message here already, which basically says, this is the asset name, editor, check frame here, see the comments in thread, because you need to re-edit the content. What it will do is send a bunch of messages inside of the thread for the specific video that it is. So again, not going to show you simply because I just don't want to dox my clients, but you will see here that the thread message here has a timestamp, and this timestamp is related to this item here. So all of the iterated messages are going to fall in the thread message of this Slack, and it just makes things really, really clean, because the editor goes in, they see that something needs to be re-edited, and then they open up the thread message and they see the reason why it needs to be edited in all of its beauty, because each of these things are timestamped. When you go into Frame and you create a comment, you can literally say, this sucks, change it. This sucks, change it. And what will happen is if it's a video, you can basically scroll over to, you know, the 20-second mark and then leave your comment, 35-second mark, leave your comment, and it will just show all of that inside of Slack. So that is the entire process there. This here is powering a lot for the client, and it's actually doing them a lot of favors, because a lot of the things that we've been able to build for them here, just with some of these intricacies that have taken ages for us to nail down, this is basically given the team the systems that have allowed them to add, I think they've added like 4 videographers and like 4 editors and 2 videographers in the past like 30 to 45 days. The head of operations is no longer the head of operations because he was the founder. Now he's actually working with either key clients or he's actually thinking about strategy instead of in the weeds. And they've promoted one of their best editors who was one of their very first editors, and he's now the operations manager, and he's just able to have good oversight on pretty much everything that he needs. So this is one of the items that we've been able to deliver for this client. This is like 1/8 of the entire editing pipeline. So over time, I'm just going to show you more and more examples of more solutions that we've been able to create. If you like this, check the link in the description. There's going to be some stuff that you like, or check the video that's linked either here, wherever.